I always get a little nervous on programs on Monday nights. She says, why? I said, well, you know, people are kind of getting back into things, and by Thursday they're ready to hang out. But thank you so much for being here. But how could you miss it?
Exactly.
Absolutely, how could you miss it? Charlene and I have been batting it back and forth for over a year now as to when we could get together and what would be a good time and what we would be doing. And we're so honored tonight to be actually having her release her book from this venue tonight. Charlene, I guess when you were here about a year ago, you were downstairs busily editing some items within it. So, you know, we've seen her go fairly much full circle with this.
I remember now.
I think most of you have been here before. Let me just say can I say one thing? Let me try to say one thing. The Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American Culture and History looks relatively new. This building is 17 years old. However, the materials in this collection were being collected by librarians as early as 1921. Now, the materials and age go back even further than that to the 1600s, hand-colored maps and et cetera. But we actually were running a library. The Atlanta Fulton, it was the city then, the Atlanta City Library saw fit to offer services to people of color in 1921, right down the street on Auburn Avenue. This has evolved, and what you have today is a facility that is committed to identifying, collecting, and making available resources by people of African descent for Fulton County and the rest of the world. We're very proud of that. In about 3 more months, we hope to be doing some real busy work in terms of activating $25 million, which will be coming to us as a bond referendum to expand our facility. So we cannot wait. We will have one of the finest atmospherically correct operations for preservation in the world in an institution like this. So this is what you see now is just a tad. We hope to have an auditorium on the first floor, all of our public programs, and yes, a great gift shop where you can buy postcards of tonight's event with Charlene and I sitting around talking. We want to, have an active bookstore where we showcase what we're doing on a regular basis. That's the welcome I wanted to give. Now, Ms. Bunn, I'd like to ask you to come forward. Ms. Bunn is from the Georgia Association
of Black Women Attorneys.
Of Black Women Attorneys. And they met here the other day.
We did.
And
we had one of our general body meetings here.
Right. And Ms. Bunn is going to bring comments?
Yes,
Is that what you're going to do? And then I come back and say a word about introduction.
That sounds like a plan.
Okay,
All
bye.
right. Good evening.
Good evening.
As she said, I'm Jacqueline Bunn, and I am the Vice President of the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys, also known as GABWA. It's my esteemed pleasure to welcome Charlene Hunter-Gault on behalf of GABWA. For those of you who are not familiar with GABWA, it's a voluntary bar association formed in 1981 to serve the needs and interests of black women attorneys. GABWA's mission is to nurture, support, and galvanize the power of black women attorneys, to advocate for women and children, and to empower our communities. For some years now, GABWA has had a book club, and I serve as co-host of the book club, and I've had the distinct honor of hosting several of the book club meetings in my home. I love to cook, and they love to eat. So we have some amazing discussions each meeting about the various selections that we have. When GABWA's president, Jadanya Butler, suggested that GABWA's book club take the lead in helping to co-sponsor this event, we jumped at the opportunity. I first became acquainted with Charlene's legacy when I attended the University of Georgia as an undergraduate. Yes! I was a broadcast journalism major, and her accomplishments were held up to students as the standard of excellence. Later, I had the distinct honor of joining her for lunch one day with a mutual friend who happens to be here this afternoon, Eugenia Harvey, who worked with her at the NewsHour in New York. It was an amazing experience that I will always cherish. It's not often that you get to meet a civil rights icon who's had such an impact on your life. As she shared some of her experiences as one of the first African American undergrads at UGA, I sat in awe. In all honesty, I'm not certain I would have had the courage to face the adversity that she met. But I'm thankful that she persevered, because her courage and trailblazing spirit allowed many students like myself to attend the University of Georgia as an undergraduate and ultimately as a law student. So this evening, on behalf of GABWA, I am delighted to welcome you, and I look forward to hearing all that you have to share.
Thank you so very, very much. So much has come as a result of what others have done. And we are most grateful to be in your presence tonight. I'm not going to do an introduction, and I'm serious when I say this lady needs none. Some people say that and then they'll tell you a whole bunch of stuff. One of the good things about working at the Auburn Avenue Research Library is whatever you need on a person of African descent, we can help you find it. So, and she has agreed that that's okay for me to do it this way. What I want to tell you is that this is her second book. And that's the other thing that may not have come out in the PR is that it's a book for young people. Now, isn't that wonderful? And I thought about it. I said, now here's a book for young people, and I'm going to have an audience of adults, some of them as senior and elder as I am. Then I thought back to when Congressman John Lewis came with his children's book about the movement. And then I thought about Miss Ferris, Dr. King's sister, and her book about him as a little boy. And they were all adult audiences. And I said, you know, that might be the best way to introduce such an item. Get the grown folks who think they know it all interested. There'll be all kinds of tidbits that you will not have known. Learn about it, and how easily then it will be for you to sound like an expert with those young people. So the book is available. I think we have maybe one copy left. Uh-oh.
I will take special orders. I've sold a bunch. I'm so sorry. I brought a ton with me, and I've already sold a bunch. I can take special orders, and I can give out a book type that can be signed, and then we can pick up your book and put your book right in. I brought a ton. I'm so sorry. You're just too fabulous.
Okay. Well, since we know it's only because we're too fabulous that we ran out. All right. So now I want to bring Charlene forward, and she is going to have an opportunity to share in her very own way part of her journey, but also how she got to where she is in terms of this book. Why was it so important? And what's the future for the book? What's going to happen with it? Who's the reader? I know I'm going to be a reader. And I hope to carry that message of that book with me as I go. The other fun thing for some of us who are in the same era is to read and be with someone and to read a book and we remembered all of that stuff, remembered what happened, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to get chairs. We're going to take care of you. And here, chairs up here. So Charlene, why don't you come on forward now, my sister? Oh, wait a minute. No, you don't have to come forward. You can sit there if you... You don't want to sit there?
I'm young.
Okay. You are indeed. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming out on a weekday evening when some of you have to go to work tomorrow. Some of you have hair like mine. You may not have to go to work tomorrow. But some of us just keep on keeping on. That's part of our heritage. And I'm so glad that Francine finally, she practically broke my arm to get me here last time. So this time I called and I said, Francine, you don't have to pressure me this time. I'm coming. I'm going to do it. So thank you, and thank my sister. When you said you love to cook, I was just at University of Georgia judging the Peabody Awards, and I came across a sign. I don't remember seeing this when I was there, but it said big dogs like to eat. So all at that point I knew was go dogs. Now I like this one, big dogs like to eat. And are we going to your house after this? But seriously, thank you, Eugenia, for posting this on Facebook, daring everybody not to come. It's just so good to see all of you, and even though there are many faces in here that I have not met personally, I'm in Atlanta, so you know, it's the kind of place where you just feel like you know everybody and you feel at home. So I hope that we can just have a good time tonight. As Francine mentioned, this is a book for young readers, but you know, I think age is but a number. And I think that my first book, actually this is my third book, but my first one was primarily, hey Lerma, my first one was around my own experiences, my own background and history, my family and so forth and so on. And although I did touch from time to time in that book on the overall civil rights movement, I didn't drill down into some of the many things that I do in this book. So it's for young readers, grade 9 and up. So that includes graduate students, PhD students, and people who are who are students of life. And I'm hoping that at the end of this, we can talk about how we get this book into schools, and I'll tell you why in a short while. When I was at the University of Georgia this week, they grabbed me out of the Peabody judging to go down and talk to some high school students, some senior high school students, and I talked to them about the book and some of the things, and they came up with some really fabulous questions. And at the end of it, we were finished with the formal part of it and finished with the Q&A and everything. And I said, well, so I hear you guys are graduating. What date are you graduating? When are you graduating? And one young brother said, May 17th. And I said, oh, wow, what a historic day, blank. And I said, you do, of course, know the significance of May 17th, blank. And I said, how about May 17th, 1954, blank. And then they started guessing, oh, you did this. I said, no. May 17th, 1954, I would not have been here today were it not for May 17th, 1954. So I said, look, don't try to guess now. I can see you don't know. I said, but I'm going to give you two things. One is an assignment to Google May 17th, 1954. And the second, I'm going to give you my email address. Now I know young people, they don't follow up on stuff, so I knew I wasn't going to get tons of emails, right? So I said, well, no, I shouldn't have said that. Some young people don't. But I said, here's my email address, and I want you to email me once you find out the significance of May 17, 1954. The other experience I had like that, which kind of confirms and affirms what I think I've done with this book, is in South Africa. My husband and I make wine there, and it'll be in Georgia soon. I'm like the African market lady now. I got a little wine over here, a few books over here, everything else you need. But anyway, this woman had done a piece on my husband and my wine and our wine collection, and we talked a little bit about America and my background and so on. And then I got an email from her a year later saying that she had a young black South African student who was fixated on American history. And when she questioned her about what aspects of American history, she said Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. And she said, I said to her, well, you know, I met somebody who you might want to meet, because she is also in that period, but she goes beyond, you know, later what they did. And so she asked me if she could bring her to visit. And I thought about that because I guess it was sometime last year, the Southern Poverty Law Center came out with a study that said the vast majority of young students today know nothing about not just history, but about the civil rights movement of just a few years ago. Well, some of us think it was just a few years ago. But I mean,
It was a few
recent
years ago.
history, it was a few years ago.
It was only a few years
And
ago.
so that sort of affirmed for me the need to come to places like this and do research and find out about things that, even though I was present at the time and Wilma was around too, Wilma was busy getting arrested here in Atlanta and probably couldn't concentrate on what was going on in Alabama and Mississippi, and I was over at the University of Georgia doing what I was doing there with Hamilton Holmes. And so as a result, I decided to dig deeper into this history and prepare it for these young people. Now, I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But first, I want to start with the opening of this book, because the introduction really sort of sets the stage for what I want to do throughout the book. And it starts with my husband and I traveling 16 hours, a long flight from South Africa to Washington, D.C., to the inauguration of President Obama. The inauguration was another milestone on the long walk to freedom from unjust laws and their unjust consequences. Activists in the movement, in one way or another, had set America on the path to this moment by demanding for Black people the wholeness of citizenship, equality of opportunity. On that cold January morning in Washington, D.C., I remember the debates I'd had with people who didn't believe they would ever in their lifetime hear a Black man take the presidential oath of office. Some of you might be in this room.
That's right.
But I believed. My belief was born out of that movement's goals and achievements. And as I stood on the grounds of the Capitol among the masses of joyful people of all ages and colors, I could not help but think back to the days of marches and demonstrations in unkind places. Back then, protesters took strength from freedom songs, one of which was How We Had Come a Mighty Long Way. And on that morning in Washington, D.C., I found myself humming that tune. On the campaign trail in Selma, Alabama on March 4th, 2007, Barack Obama acknowledged his debt to the civil rights movement, saying, "I'm here because somebody marched for our freedom. I'm here because all of you sacrificed for me." And then the line that just blew me away, he said, "I stand on the shoulders of giants." He was speaking at the Brown Chapel AME Church, where more than 40 years earlier, many of the giants he spoke of were teenagers and young adults. In that sense, they weren't very different from many of the volunteers I saw during Obama's presidential campaign, handing out leaflets, knocking on doors, and shouting into bullhorns. The young volunteers in 2008 worked with the kind of energy and enthusiasm and desire for change I had not seen since the days of the civil rights movement. The mood, spirit, and activism I saw on college campuses around the country in that winter took me back to the days when young people poured out of their classrooms and into the streets, marching for freedom. Freedom to be judged, in Martin Luther King's words, not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. But there were critical differences too. While the young volunteers of today may have confronted harsh words, that was as far as it got. The young people of the movement were confronted not only with harsh words, but with harsh deeds, from brutal beatings and torture, to imprisonment, to murder. Waiting for the inauguration ceremony to begin, there were times I had to walk away from other people. As I reflected back on the journey that had brought me to that moment, probably gonna happen now, my eyes kept filling with tears that I didn't want to have to explain. Part of my emotion was driven by the thoughts of the ones we lost along the way, some from racist violence, others like my classmate Hamilton Holmes, who walked into history with me through the gates of the University of Georgia from natural causes. At 54, at the peak of his career as an orthopedic surgeon, Hamp died suddenly of a heart attack. Vivian Malone, who had desegregated the University of Alabama, had a stroke and died at the age of 63. I keep thinking that had they lived, they would surely have been somewhere in this throng, and I miss their presence. But I was also overwhelmed by joy. Back on the campuses I visited in the winter of 2008, I had finished complimenting the students. When I had finished complimenting the students for their renewed activism, I would ask them to join me in another song that used to keep our feet in the street until freedom rang. A song that went, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I couldn't help thinking what a giant step, not just Barack Obama, but America was taking that day, walking up the Freedom Trail. Barack Obama does indeed stand on the shoulders of giants. Thousands of determined men, women, and young people who blazed the trail for him just as our generation stood on the shoulders of giants like Wilma's father, who from the day they were brought to these shores never the denial of their full humanity, freedom, justice, and rights. How my generation built on that legacy and reached their mountaintops is a remarkable story of faith, perseverance, and courage. Now, back to these young people for whom this book is written, you might want to ask, why do they need to know? And one of the reasons they need to know is that in spite of the victories that we achieved back in the day, the dust from the bins of history continue to rise.
That's right.
According to a recent study by the Manhattan Institute, the end of segregation has not caused the end of racial equality. Segregation is not legal, but it still lives. Inadequate housing, resegregated schools attended only by black children, in prisons disproportionately filled with young black men, the new Jim Crow, as historian Michelle Alexander puts it, and among other things, in the unemployment statistics that show black unemployment twice that of non-Hispanic whites. And the same is true in South Africa, where young black South Africans find themselves in the same sorry boat as their black American counterparts, even in a country now led by many of the heroes of that struggle. And of course, we have recent examples of how a luta continua. The case of Trayvon, the case of another young black man shot a few days later. So part of the reason this book, I think, is important is to tell young people that regardless of the challenges that they face, which are different, of course, in some ways from ours, not altogether different, but there are ways to build themselves up to confront these challenges if they should choose. Atlanta's own Julian Bond said recently, if future generations know the history of struggle, they will live in a better America. And why is that? Well, let's go back to the Martinique-born philosopher Frantz Fanon, who was a philosopher, a psychiatrist, a revolutionary, and he wrote that each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative obscurity. Now, when the students here in Atlanta and the students in Greenville and the students throughout the South began their demonstrations for justice, it was in relative obscurity. Part of the reasons for the Freedom Rides was to get the attention of the federal government to do something about the continuing violation of federal laws that had on interstate commerce, black waiting rooms and white waiting rooms. So that was, and when they began, of course, the Freedom Rides, it was in relative obscurity and continued until they put their bodies on the line. I mean, when they left Washington, D.C. on that first Freedom Ride, John Lewis and others wrote out their wills.
That's right.
because they had no idea what they were going to confront in this society, these societies in the South that had a history of violence and murdering people who didn't stay in their place. But again, they made those choices, as Fanon said or indicated, in relative obscurity at the time. What are the lessons that show young people with the courage of their convictions, the courage that they can make a difference, the courage that brought America closer to the promise of equality for all? One of the things that I have learned over the years, I mean, we thought once we got the Civil Rights Act of 1965, and that's where the book starts, of course, as I just read, with us in at the inauguration, and it goes from 1959, when I was a student with Wilma at Turner High School. She left me early and went to Clark on early admission. I'll never forgive her for that. But 1959 was the year that Hamilton and I were approached at Turner High School to ask if we would be interested in attending Georgia State. And, you know, they like to say that we were second class and they treated us as second class citizens. But the one thing, and I try to get this across in this book, the thing I think that enabled us to do the things that we did was that when our parents couldn't give us first class citizenship because they didn't have it themselves, what they did, just, I guess, from the ancient, what would you call it, the spirit that flowed in their blood, when they couldn't give us first class citizenship, what they gave us was a first class sense of ourselves. So when Hampton and I went down to Georgia State, which isn't the place it is today, taking up Auburn Avenue, as I understand, but at any rate, Hamp and I looked at the curriculum, and we looked at what they had to offer, and Hamp even at that point wanted to be a doctor. I don't know if he had yet decided he wanted to be an orthopedist, but I wanted to be a journalist. I knew I wanted to be a journalist because I wanted to be the next Brenda Starr. We looked at the curriculum, and we turned to the adults who had taken us down there, Dr. Clinton Warner, Jesse Hill Jr., and Carl Holman, and we said, this isn't quite what we had in mind. And they said, what do you mean? We said, well, this isn't giving us what we want to do what we want in our lives. And then they thought they had lost 2 potential students to desegregate public higher education. And then, although Hamp and I were competitors, and I always tried to stay at least beside him, if not ahead of him, he was the one, and I will admit this, who stepped out on the steps of Georgia State's admissions office and pointed north. He said, I want to go there. And I knew immediately what he meant. I said, me too. Wasn't any way I was going to let Hamp get ahead of me. And the adults were dumbfounded because there had been violence here in Atlanta, and they expected there would possibly be violence if we went into Georgia State, but they had a group of black men who were prepared to take care of us. And yet, when they heard Athens, part of them thought, wow, Athens, University of Georgia, The other part of them thought, we don't know anybody there. There's no way we can protect these kids. But they saw the determination in our eyes, and they worked it out. Now, of course, when we did go, we didn't have any security, even though we had to go through some towns that were full of Ku Klux Klan and all kinds of awful people, but we had faith. And, you know, sometimes they say faith is the one thing that when you get to the edge of all things that you know, and you get ready to step off into the darkness, either you will step off onto a plank or some solid ground. This is Teilhard de Chardin, whom I'm sort of screwing up here, but that was he's a little more eloquent than this. But when you get to the edge of all things that you know and you get ready to step off into the darkness and there's nothing there to hold you, you will be taught how to fly. And that's what happened with all of us. So that was 1959. 1960, of course, was Greensboro, which was the beginning of the Civil Rights Revolution, when 4 young boys in a college bull session, sitting around, and before the night was over, they had decided to go down and sit in at Woolworth's. And of course, as many of you would know, the rest is history. Now, my favorite paragraph in the whole book is this one. This is the year 1961, and each one starts with a song or something from the movement, and this is the one that starts with Harry Belafonte's Day-O, which the students used to sing, "Give us freedom, freedom's coming, and it won't be long." Now check this out. This is my favorite paragraph. The year 1961 was one of the busiest and bloodiest of the young civil rights movement. It was a year that tested the nonviolent commitment of young activists, even as doors long shut were forced open and young people like myself walked through them. It was the year Barack Hussein Obama was born. Now, I have to say as an aside, I have written about this. I give Barack's mother, who as you all know was white, a lot of credit for who he is.
That's right.
In fact, I wrote an article called "The Woman Who Made the Man" just as he was about to take office. Because it was she who taught him in Indonesia about the civil rights heroes in America.
That's right.
She had a couple that were her favorites. Who was it? Harry Belafonte she was in love with or something like that. She had this big crush on. But she taught him about the civil rights heroes of Black America, just as she taught him about the history of his father's country, Kenya, and how it came out of colonialism. And she taught him, even though he had abandoned them by this point, she taught him about his character.
That's right.
He was a flawed individual, but in many respects he had great character. She said he never cut corners. He never took the easy way. And so these were things that she was teaching young Barack. She said that he was like most young boys, excuse me, men, but their testosterone starts flowing at a certain point. I got one, so I can say this with authority. And so young Barack, who is now the President of the United States, did not want to get out of bed and do his homework when his mother wanted to help him, and he was screwing around in school and not doing that well. So she started getting him up. She was a secretary in one of the embassies, I think.
Yeah.
And she would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and wake him up. And he would say, "Oh, I got a stomach ache," or "I got this." She said, "Whatever you got, you're gonna get out and get these lessons."
That's
So
right.
that was the groundwork that she laid for him to stand all those years later in Selma and say, "I stand on the shoulders of giants." He knew it. When Jesse Jackson came to South Africa a few weeks ago, he was talking about the various human rights leaders, anti-apartheid leaders in South Africa. And he named Mandela, but he named many others. And when I went there in '85, when there was a dark cloud over the whole country, the government, the white minority regime was enforcing its apartheid laws with the most vicious, brutal agents of its state that they could find. And you go into a little township, these black enclaves that were separated from the white towns, so that for easy containment in case of trouble. And you would talk to these young people in those days, and you would say, I said, interviewing them, what is it that you're demonstrating for? And a 14-year-old or a 12-year-old would say, "We want Mandela to be released." But then they would go on to say, "We want to see Ahmed Kathrada," and they would just name all of the people who were in prison with Nelson Mandela. The young people, if the Southern Poverty Law Center did the same study in South Africa today that they did here, they would find the same things. Just as they found here, young people know Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and they should, by the way, but there are many others. And
Yeah.
in South Africa, they know Mandela. And they could not do what that young woman did in 1985. And this group of young people in South Africa who were born after 94 or in that period are called the Born Frees. And so they, today, you ask them who was in prison with Mandela, they might be able to name a couple of people, but not like that young girl did back in 1985. Now, one of the things that worried me when I was writing this book was that every chapter was filled with violence. It was, and I thought, now this is a book for young people. Am I going to traumatize them, telling them, you know, and every page they turn, and if they may be reading it at night, you know, getting ready to go to school the next day, they might have just had their dinner. So I talked to Skip Gates up at Harvard, and Skip Gates said they confronted with violence every day today. What are you afraid of?
That's
But
right.
here's one of the things that I debated about putting in the book. And finally, because it's in the book, I resolved the debate with myself. But I thought it was important for these young people to understand not only that Wilma and Carolyn were in jail here, and Wilma cried, and Carolyn consoled her because they didn't know at that point it was jail without bail, and they didn't know when they were going to get out. But then I talk about that, but I also talk about things like this. This happened in Mississippi, Macomb, and it was again in 1961. I can't give you the exact date right now, but it was when they had decided they were trying to register black voters, and a lot of the young people had been arrested for sitting in at the bus stations. One was a 16-year-old, Brenda Travis, who got arrested in the Macomb Greyhound bus station, and the authorities put her in an adult jail with adult criminals. And as we all know, some of the older generation were very conservative, and they didn't want anything to do with us or anything to do with those young people who were doing the direct action protests. And when she was released and tried to return to school, as I write here, the conservative black principal, whose position was at the mercy of white school administrators, suspended her and another student who had participated in the sit-in. She continued once she got suspended to protest, and they sent her away to reform school. And I think she's written a book or is about to write a book, and I hope we'll all get that. But then there were a bunch of them who decided that they would go to the steps of to the Macomb County City Hall and stage a sit-in, a pray-in, actually, not a sit-in, nothing challenging, nothing confrontational, but a pray-in. And I say all, including Brenda Travis, were arrested, but not before Moses and McDew and Bob Zellner, the lone white among the protesters, were severely beaten by the mob. One attacker tried to gouge out Zellner's eyes. White SNCC members were even more despised by the whites there than black members. And Zellner recalls this, and this was the one I debated about and finally said, they gotta know. He says, one of the guys got behind me. He started putting his fingers into my eye sockets, and he actually would work my eyeball out of my eye socket and sort of down on my cheekbone. He was trying to get my eyeball between the thumb and his index finger so he could get a grip on it and really pull it out. So what I would do is, I would wait until he had maneuvered it into a good place, and before he could clamp down, I would move my head in such a way that it would make him lose his grip. And my eyeball would slip between his fingers and pop back in my head with a thunk. Now, should I have left that in?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, I did.
We
Thank you.
We lived that.
That's page 65,
We
so
lived it.
don't skip over it.
Okay.
But you know, I mean,
Because I got hit in the head too.
yeah, okay. So,
Yeah, you
so
should have put that in there.
the book is filled with stories like that, but in the end, it's filled with triumph and the wonderful illustrations. The New York Times is part of the publication team that put this together for me, New York Times and Roaring Book Press. So I go through everything through 1965, including the Freedom Democratic Party and Fannie Lou Hamer and so
That's
forth. So
right.
a lot of names now that if young people read this book, they're going to know about more than Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks.
That's
and
good.
one of the things I do, speaking of standing on the shoulders of giants, there were a lot of people who before Rosa Parks and before Martin Luther King and before any of us also were refusing to accept second-class citizenship.
That's right.
I wasn't able to go into all of their stories, but I went into some. And then I think to show these young people that these things were not in vain, again, I talk about the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1965, but I have an epilogue which talks about some of the perpetrators of some of the most obscene violence, the murders and the tortures and the beatings and the dragging of people behind cars and terrible things, and how committed young lawyers and activists today working in places like the Southern Poverty Law Center, and people, there's one in the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project, I think it's based in Boston, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department have a Civil Rights era cold case initiative began in 2007, and they have actually located many of the people that all white juries found acquitted for the heinous crimes that they did against black people. And you will all remember Byron D. Beckwith, sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Medgar Evers, and on and on and on. And then we have a timeline at the end which
Many
shows
years later.
many of the
Many years later.
well, but it happened finally, and
Yeah.
there's still others that they're still pursuing, although many have died. Their families are around, and so on. So, and then there's some of the speeches, like Dr. King, some articles from the Times, and some of the speeches, like Dr. King's wonderful speech at the 1963 march on Washington. So I guess in the end, and I hope that eventually they'll do a teacher guide, because what we're hoping is that these books will go into schools as well as into your libraries. But I think that the lesson here, and the lesson that I hope the teachers and others, your parents and grandparents, and in some cases great-grandparents, would be passing along to their children, is that democracy is a wonderful system, but it's a work in progress. If you look at what's happening in Africa today, you can see more and more countries moving in the democratic space, but some slipping back. And the same is true even here in America, that in order to preserve the promises of this country, the promises that are in our Constitution, it requires ongoing vigilance. And some of us, those who are my age, in South Africa they call us go-go's, which I think is a lovely way of saying old people. And they respect us, as being go-go's. But we need to help them understand not just the civil rights movement, but the context in which it evolved. And today, like Michelle Alexander is calling the imprisonment of black men, the new Jim Crow, the Trayvon Martin case, and so many others, I'm so thrilled. In fact, I have Facebooked, because I didn't see any students at the University of Georgia demonstrating when I was looking at television, seeing them demonstrating elsewhere, and I Facebooked, where are the students at the University of Georgia? And a few minutes later, somebody Facebooked back and said, they protested last week, like, don't get on, don't protest. But what I hope that they will do is appreciate not just the Trayvon Martin case. We don't know how, in spite of the fact that CNN is trying it on its air, we don't know how it's going to turn out. the weight of, well, I don't want to go into that, but you know where the weight of the evidence is. But there are hundreds of them.
That's right.
Hundreds of
That's
them.
right.
And it's not just them, but it's just like I said, it's all these kids in these resegregated schools. I mean, Hamilton and I went to the University of Georgia, and the judge ordered not only that Georgia desegregate, but that all the other institutions of higher learning, as well as the elementary and high schools in the state, be desegregated by the fall of '61. And I'm told today
To this day, it
that
hasn't
our
happened.
schools
Has
are
not happened.
desegregated. It's
It has not happened.
So there's so many things, but I don't necessarily advocate that all of these young people be activists, but just understand the country that they're living in, and as Julian said, how they keep it the way we had hoped it would be. So I guess that's kind of where I am on this, hoping that the young people of today will be exposed and realize that despite the mountains of challenges today and in the future, multicolored generations, because the country in no time is going to find the majority today as the minority. And so we've got to understand our multicultural generations that are coming forth, that they could be inspired by the civil rights movement, by the anti-apartheid struggle, and that both of those struggles can, in the words of Edward R. Murrow, was talking about television, but it's true of their knowledge of democracy, that this past that I've been talking about and write about in this book can educate, illuminate, and inspire, not only in our two countries, but all over the world. Look at, well, I'm a little disturbed right now about Egypt, but the Arab Spring was right out of our playbook. And hopefully, the young people who were so committed to equality and human rights and freedom and democracy will stay on the case. One of the young guys from, which country was it? I think it might have been Egypt. And he was saying that it was so interesting, no, it was Tunisia. I was just there. And he was saying that it's so interesting now that he was on this side marching on the powers that be, and once they overthrew them nonviolently, and they became in charge, others are now marching on him to keep him honest. Yeah. And so again, I don't think all of our young people have to be activists in that way, but one of the young people I met at the University of Georgia now is studying some sort of ecology program that deals with seeing a little bug on that tree down there from a satellite flying around the earth. So I mean, we got to save the planet. Why are we so hot today? Why have we been hot in Georgia, I'm told, all winter? It might have been nice for some of us go-go's who have to worry about our arthritis, but it's weird. So there are all kinds of ways for our young people to be engaged, but what they have to do is have the courage of their commitments and understand the context in which their lives exist the way they do, and let's hope that in our classrooms, our teachers can know this history and share it with them. Thank you.